The Ottoman Empire didn't collapse in a single moment. There was no final battle, no dramatic scene where flags were lowered and power vanished overnight. What ended the Ottoman Empire was far quieter, far slower, and far more deliberate. It happened in spreadsheets before it happened in streets, in contracts before it happened on maps, in debt ledgers, long before soldiers noticed anything was wrong. By the time the empire officially disappeared after World War I, its fate had already been sealed decades earlier. Sovereignty had been transferred not through conquest, but through finance. Britain didn't take the Middle East by force. Britain bought it. At the start of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was still one of the largest political entities on Earth. It controlled critical trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. It governed diverse populations and commanded enormous territory. But beneath the surface, the empire was entering a financial age it did not understand and could not control. Europe had already transformed warfare, industry, and power around access to credit. Banks, bond markets, and national debt had become strategic weapons. States that controlled financing could fight longer wars, build faster, and modernize without waiting for tax revenue. The Ottomans, by contrast, operated on an older fiscal model. Revenue came slowly from land taxes, customs duties, and monopolies. Expenditures, however, were rising rapidly. Modern weapons were expensive, railways were expensive, steam-powered navies were expensive, bureaucratic reform was expensive. Every serious modernization effort required capital the empire did not have in cash. At first, borrowing looked like progress. European powers had perfected the art of sovereign lending. To bankers in London and Paris, the Ottoman Empire looked like a reasonable client. It had vast landholdings, millions of taxpayers, and political continuity. Lending to an empire was considered safe, especially when loans were secured against future revenues. The first major foreign loans arrived during the Crimean War in the 1850s. Britain and France needed the Ottomans as a buffer against Russia, and lending money to an ally seemed natural. The interest rates were high, but the loans were marketed as temporary measures. Once peace returned, repayment would be easy, or so everyone claimed. But debt has inertia. Once a state enters foreign credit markets, exiting becomes nearly impossible. Each loan restructures political behavior. Each interest payment creates urgency. Each refinancing embeds dependence. By the 1860s, the Ottoman Empire was no longer borrowing for development. It was borrowing to stabilize its budget. By the early 1870s, it was borrowing simply to pay previous interest. Revenue no longer funded policy. Policy existed to service debt. This is the invisible moment when sovereignty shifts. In theory, the empire was still independent. In practice, large portions of its income were already pre-committed to foreign bondholders. Customs revenues were pledged, tobacco taxes were assigned, salt monopolies were transferred. The state collected money, but the money did not belong to the state. European financiers understood this dynamic perfectly. They did not want Ottoman collapse. Collapse would have wiped out their investments. What they wanted was control without responsibility. That control came after the default of 1875. The empire publicly announced it could no longer meet its obligations. The announcement shocked European markets. Ottoman bonds collapsed. But instead of triggering abandonment, it triggered intervention. In 1881, European creditors imposed the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. This institution was revolutionary in its quiet brutality. It placed foreign officials inside the Ottoman financial system with direct authority over revenue streams. These officials did not advise the empire. They ruled parts of it. Entire sectors of Ottoman income were removed from government control. Tobacco, alcohol, stamps, customs duties, and salt taxes were collected by this foreign-managed institution. The revenue went first to debt service. Only what remained went to the Ottoman treasury. For the first time in history, a sovereign empire functioned while outsiders managed its income. No invasion was necessary. No occupation was declared. The empire still existed, but it no longer controlled its own money. From this point forward, Ottoman political decisions were constrained by financial consent. Every reform required creditor approval. Every military initiative was evaluated against bond market reactions. Domestic priorities became secondary to foreign confidence. Britain quickly realized what this system offered. Influence without accountability. Control without the cost of governance. This model spread. Egypt followed the same path. Massive borrowing to build the Suez Canal placed Egypt deep in debt. When Egypt defaulted, Britain and France seized control of its finances. When nationalist unrest threatened that control, Britain occupied Egypt militarily, not to conquer it, but to protect financial flows and trade routes. The lesson was clear. Debt was the entry point. Administration followed. Military presence was optional and temporary. As the Ottoman Empire weakened further, Britain positioned itself to inherit what mattered most: strategic geography and future revenue. Railways were financed by British capital and designed to serve British interests. Ports facilitated European trade, not local industrialization. The economic map of the empire was rewired outward, not inward. When oil entered the picture in the early 20th century, the groundwork was already laid. Concessions were granted under financial pressure. Royalty structures favored foreign companies. Local rulers depended on external support to maintain power. World War I did not destroy the Ottoman Empire. It finalized a process already complete. When the empire collapsed, Britain did not start negotiating from scratch. It inherited systems it already controlled. Mandates replaced provinces. New borders replaced old ones. But the economic architecture remained externalized. Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and the Gulf states emerged not as financially autonomous nations, but as managed entities embedded in global financial systems dominated by Britain. Debt had done its work. What makes this story important is not nostalgia or blame. It is recognition. The Ottoman Empire did not fail because of cultural backwardness or military inferiority. It failed because it attempted to modernize inside a system where it did not control credit creation. Once monetary sovereignty was lost, political sovereignty followed automatically. This pattern did not end with empires. Today, the instruments are cleaner, the language is softer, the institutions are international, but the mechanics remain unchanged. States borrow in currencies they do not control. Revenue is pledged years in advance. Policy becomes constrained by refinancing cycles. Strategic assets are monetized quietly, and sovereignty erodes without announcements. The Ottoman Empire teaches a brutal lesson. Collapse begins when debt becomes structural rather than temporary, when financing stops being a tool and becomes a necessity. Empires do not fall when they lose wars. They fall when they lose flexibility. By the time borders are redrawn, the decisions have already been made by creditors, not citizens. Britain did not conquer the Middle East in a moment of imperial ambition. It absorbed it patiently through balance sheets, default clauses, and administrative control. Debt replaced armies. Interest replaced occupation. Contracts replaced conquest. That is how the Ottoman Empire ended. And that is why understanding financial power matters more than ever today, because the most powerful empires of the modern age will not fall in flames. They will dissolve quietly, one loan at a time. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe for more.